It is just after 3 in the afternoon at 10,000 feet. A young flight attendant is handed a folded note by a quiet, suited man in row 18. She rolls her eyes, just another lonely businessman trying to proposition her, and drops it into her purse, unread. The man leans in close, his voice dead calm over the roar of the engines, and whispers, "Miss, you had better look at that note. I have a bomb." You absolutely have to stick around until the end of this episode to hear the unbelievable, biologically impossible resolution to this mystery. We are Mike and Abby, and welcome to Wild Crime Podcasts. We are officially done with boring, slow-burn true crime. We're tearing into the most baffling cases on Earth, untangling the lies, and dropping you right in the middle of the madness.
Whether you are on a long drive, crushing a workout, or just feeling a little bored, we are here to walk you through the mystery and make your next hour incredibly thrilling.
And today, we are hunting a literal ghost. But we aren't relying on the urban legends, right? No Hollywood scripts here.
Oh, definitely not. We are pulling directly from the original source materials. I mean, we're talking declassified FBI vault files, the actual transcribed testimonies of the flight crew, and those crazy 2009 metallurgical reports.
Right, and even geological surveys from the Army Corps of Engineers. Our mission today is to totally strip away the romanticized folklore of this guy and expose the terrifying, factual reality of commercial aviation's most baffling unsolved crime.
Absolutely. And to understand the reality, we really have to start on the ground. It is November 24th, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve.
The busiest travel day of the year.
Exactly. So we're at Portland International Airport. A man walks up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. He pays $20 in cash for a one-way ticket on Flight 305 to Seattle.
And I want to highlight something right up front. The name he prints on that voucher in block letters is Dan Cooper.
Right. Not D.B. Cooper.
Exactly. He signed it Dan Cooper. The entire world knows him by the wrong name, and we are going to expose exactly how the media totally botched that detail later.
It is such a wild detail. But for now, picture this guy. He walks onto a Boeing 727-100 and heads straight for the very last row, taking seat 18E.
What did he look like? Because the sketch is, well, it's famous.
Yeah, so witness accounts, mostly from the flight attendants and a few passengers nearby, describe him wearing a dark suit. Some said it was a russet or brown color, but he had this black raincoat draped over it.
Okay, so he gave the impression of a man dressed entirely in black.
Right. And he wore a crisp white shirt, a thin black clip-on tie from JCPenney, and slip-on loafers. The moment he sits down, he orders a bourbon and 7-Up from the flight attendant, Florence Schaffner.
Okay, we need to pause the timeline right here. I want you to imagine what it was actually like to be Florence Schaffner in 1971.
It was a completely different world.
It really was. People romanticized this era as the Golden Age of Aviation, but for flight crews, it was an absolute nightmare. They literally called it the Golden Age of Hijacking.
Which is terrifying.
Right, because between 1968 and 1971, there were over 100 commercial hijackings. Over 100. People were constantly commandeering planes and demanding to be flown to Cuba.
It happens so often that airlines actually started issuing pilots maps of the Caribbean just in case.
Just in case. There was no TSA, there were no metal detectors. You could walk onto a commercial airliner as easily as you walk onto a city bus.
And the flight attendants bore the absolute brunt of this vulnerability.
Exactly. Not only the threat of hijackings, but the sheer unfiltered harassment from passengers. Florence Schaffner was so relentlessly harassed by aggressive businessmen on these flights that she actually resorted to wearing different wigs.
Wow, really? Wigs?
Yeah, to disguise herself from men who wouldn't leave her alone.
Yeah.
So when this guy in a suit hands her a note right after takeoff, her brain doesn't scream terrorist.
No, her brain says, great, another creep.
Exactly. She doesn't even open it. It's just a defense mechanism.
She ignores it completely until he forces the issue. He leans in and tells her she better look at it. So she finally opens the folded paper.
And what does it say?
The note is incredibly specific. It demands $200,000 in $20 bills. Adjusted for inflation, we are talking about roughly $1.6 million today.
That is a massive amount of cash to demand midair.
Huge. He also demands 4 parachutes, 2 main back chutes, and 2 reserve front chutes. And he demands a fuel truck standing by on the tarmac when they land in Seattle.
Schaffner must have been stunned.
She was. She actually thinks it might be a sick joke and asks him if he is kidding. In response, he calmly unlatches his dark briefcase and opens it just enough for her to look inside.
And what she sees would make anyone's blood run cold. She looks down and sees 8 red cylinders stacked neatly inside. They look exactly like road flares or sticks of dynamite.
Right, and there are red insulated wires tangled all around them, connecting to a large, heavy cylindrical battery.
Imagine the sheer, isolating terror of standing in the back of a pressurized metal tube at 10,000 feet, realizing the quiet guy drinking a bourbon is holding enough explosives to blow the tail off the airplane.
Let us stop and really analyze his mental state right here, because this is crucial. Pop culture has spent half a century painting Dan Cooper as a suave, gentleman thief.
A James Bond figure who just wanted to rob the bank without hurting anyone.
Exactly. But the psychology we're observing here is pure transactional narcissism. After he threatens to murder 36 completely innocent passengers and the entire crew, he reaches into his pocket and hands Schaffner a $20 bill to pay for his bourbon.
Wait, he pays for the drink while holding them hostage?
Yes. He tells her to, quote, keep the change because he is inconveniencing her.
Hold on. I need to jump in because that detail always makes my blood boil. That is not chivalry. That is textbook sociopathy. You do not get to play the polite gentleman while you are actively holding a detonator in your lap. He is offering a financial tip to a woman whose life he is currently threatening to end in a fiery explosion.
It's so twisted.
That isn't a guy being cool under pressure. That is a deeply twisted need for total control. He wants to dominate the situation so completely that he forces his victim to accept a gratuity from her tormentor.
You hit the nail on the head. He views extreme terroristic violence as a mundane business transaction. The flight crew described his demeanor as refined and not nervous.
Which is terrifying in itself.
Right. Passenger Bill Mitchell, a college student sitting directly across the aisle in row 18, noted that Cooper actually spilled a bit of his drink at one point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and instead of ignoring it or asking for a napkin, Cooper immediately and obsessively cleaned it up himself. He was compulsive about remaining inconspicuous. He didn't want the other passengers to notice anything out of the ordinary.
If you were watching on YouTube right now, drop a comment. Would you have noticed the guy quietly sipping a bourbon and smoking a cigarette was actually holding a bomb trigger in his lap?
Probably not, because those 36 other passengers had absolutely zero idea. They thought they were just on a routine 30-minute hopper flight to Seattle.
His behavior in the air is chilling, but the psychological torture he inflicts on the ground is where the real nightmare begins.
Because that quick 30-minute flight turns into a grueling, agonizing holding pattern. Flight 305 ends up circling Seattle for 2 agonizing hours.
2 hours of just waiting.
Yeah. The pilots get on the intercom and tell the passengers there is a minor mechanical difficulty, just to keep them docile and seated. Meanwhile, on the ground, absolute chaos is unfolding.
I can only imagine. The FBI, the Seattle Police Department, airline executives, they're all scrambling.
Gathering $200,000 in $20 bills on Thanksgiving Eve is a logistical nightmare. They have to run to several local banks, assemble 10,000 individual bills, and microfilm every single serial number so the currency can be tracked later.
And they have to find 4 parachutes. They ended up sourcing them from a local skydiving instructor named Earl Causey.
But back up in the air, the psychological dynamic is shifting in a terrifying way. Florence Schaffner goes up to the cockpit to relay the demands, and Cooper forces another flight attendant, a 22-year-old named Tina Mucklow, to come sit right next to him.
Think about that. He isolates a 22-year-old girl and makes her the sole conduit between the bomb and the pilots trying to keep everyone alive.
Mucklow sits in the jump seat directly adjacent to him. Cooper is chain-smoking. He prefers Raleigh brand cigarettes, which were an off-brand unfiltered smoke.
And what is fascinating from an investigative standpoint is that Mucklow and the other witnesses noticed he was smoking exclusively with his left hand.
Which means his right hand is completely free, just hovering right over the open briefcase, right over the detonator.
Exactly. He is completely ambidextrous or just highly disciplined. And during those 2 hours of circling, he engages Mucklow in casual conversation.
He asks her where she is from. She tells him Minnesota. He nods and says it is very nice country. Then he offers her one of his Raleigh cigarettes, and she actually accepts it.
It is this bizarre, incredibly tense, almost Stockholm-esque intimacy. She is absolutely terrified, but she realizes her primary job right now is to keep this man calm so he doesn't murder everyone on board.
She is essentially acting as a human shield.
Right. And at one point, she musters the courage to ask him a direct question. She asks why he targeted Northwest Airlines, and his response is one of the most revealing pieces of the entire puzzle.
What did he say?
He looks at her and says, "I don't have a grudge against your airline. I just have a grudge.
Wow, that specific phrasing completely dismantles the idea that this was just a random financial heist. I just have a grudge.
Yeah, it strongly suggests a personal, institutional, or industrial motive. He felt wronged by the system, by society, or perhaps by the aviation industry itself. Something was driving this beyond just the $200,000.
Finally, at 5:39 in the evening, the plane lands at SeaTac. It's November in Seattle, so it is completely dark, it's raining, the weather is totally miserable.
And he forces the pilot to taxi to a remote, brightly lit section of the tarmac, right?
Yes. He is hyper aware of his surroundings. He knows snipers are likely setting up on the perimeter, so he orders the crew to pull down every single window shade in the cabin.
So,
Once the fuel truck arrives and the money is brought on board in a canvas bank bag, he actually honors his end of the bargain. He releases the 76 passengers.
and those passengers walk off the plane completely oblivious to the fact that they were hostages for the last 2 hours.
He also releases Florence Schaffner and another flight attendant, Alice Hancock. But he forces Tina Mucklow, the pilot William Scott, the co-pilot Bill Ratasak, and the flight engineer Harold Anderson to stay on board.
This is where we see the intense, highly specific engineering knowledge Cooper possessed. This isn't just a guy who read a magazine article about airplanes.
Definitely not.
He demands that the plane take off again, this time heading south toward Mexico City. But he lays out incredibly specific parameters. He demands they fly with the aft stairs lowered and fully deployed.
And the pilot, William Scott, tells him flat out that it is impossible. He says the Boeing 727 cannot take off with the rear stairs deployed. The drag would be too severe or the hydraulics would fail.
But Cooper knew something the seasoned commercial pilot didn't. He knew the 727 absolutely could fly in that configuration.
The 727 was unique because it had 3 rear-mounted engines and a spare well that dropped directly down from the belly of the tail. Cooper knew the hydraulic locks could be bypassed.
Which was classified level knowledge at the time. It was a fact known primarily to Boeing engineers or to CIA operatives who were actively using 727s to drop cargo and agents into the jungles of Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War.
Wait, I need to process this. How does a guy in a JCPenney tie know the aerodynamic limits of a commercial airliner better than the captain who flies it every day?
It is a massive red flag pointing toward an aviation insider.
It is. But his tactical brilliance regarding the aircraft's mechanics is completely contradicted by his bizarre, almost delusional behavior on the ground.
What do you mean?
While they're sitting on the tarmac waiting for the refueling to finish, Cooper actually unzips the canvas bag full of ransom money, pulls out a thick stack of $20 bills, and tries to offer it to Tina Mucklow.
Are you serious? He tries to tip her with extortion money.
Yes.
Which is just absurd. It's beyond offensive. It shows complete detachment from reality. Mucklow, displaying incredible composure and professionalism under the threat of death, refuses.
She looks at him and tells him it is against company policy to accept tips.
And he just calmly nods, retracts his hand, and puts the money back in the bag.
You might think having insider Boeing knowledge makes him a tactical expert, but the catastrophic gear he chose for his jump proves he was anything but.
Because they take off again at roughly 7:40 in the evening. And this is where the physics of this crime just fall completely apart.
The plane lifts off, heading south toward a planned refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. Cooper has dictated the flight metrics with military precision.
They had to fly no higher than 10,000 feet. They must keep the landing gear down the entire time. The wing flaps must be set precisely at 15 degrees, and the speed must be kept at a dangerously slow 170 knots.
Let's break down why he asked for those specific things. 10,000 feet is the maximum altitude you can fly where a human can still breathe comfortably without the cabin being pressurized.
Right. And keeping the landing gear down and the flaps at 15 degrees creates massive aerodynamic drag, which forces the plane to fly slowly without stalling out and dropping like a stone.
He is essentially turning a high-speed commercial jet into a slow-moving cargo plane. Meanwhile, the Air Force scrambles 2 F-106 fighter jets from McChord Air Force Base to tail the 727. They want eyes on him the exact moment he leaves that plane.
But the Air Force's interceptors are completely neutralized by Cooper's flight parameters, right?
Totally. The F-106 is a supersonic fighter jet designed to intercept Soviet bombers. It literally cannot fly at 170 knots without aerodynamically stalling and falling out of the sky.
It's like trying to drive a Ferrari at 10 miles an hour on a highway behind a garbage truck. The engine just wants to go.
Exactly. So the fighter pilots are forced to fly in massive wide S-turns, banking back and forth for miles just to stay behind the lumbering commercial airliner.
Yeah, and add to that the environmental conditions.
Yeah.
It is pitch black outside. It is raining heavily. There's dense, thick cloud cover. It creates a massive surveillance blind spot.
Inside the cabin, it is just Cooper and Tina Mucklow. She's pleading with him. She begs him, please, please take the bomb with you.
He looks at her and says he will either disarm it or take it. Then he orders her to go forward to the cockpit, close the first-class curtain, and absolutely not come back.
The last time she ever sees him, he is tying the bank bag full of 21 pounds of cash around his waist.
At exactly 8:13 in the evening, the instruments in the cockpit register a sudden, sharp drop in air pressure. The crew feels their ears pop.
The tail of the 727 violently pitches upward, forcing the pilots to actively wrestle the control yoke just to bring the plane back to level flight.
That physical oscillation, that pressure bump, is the only empirical evidence we have of the exact moment Dan Cooper walked down those aft stairs and leaped into the void.
And the fighter jet saw absolutely nothing. Not a shadow, not a flicker of movement, not a parachute opening. They were flying totally blind in the storm.
So let's rip apart the myth of the genius skydiver right now. Because for decades, people have talked about Cooper like he was a special forces ghost. But this jump was not a masterclass in tactical infiltration.
Not at all. It was pure, staggering hubris. The physical conditions alone were a death sentence.
Let us detail exactly why this was a fatal miscalculation. He is jumping at 10,000 feet. The plane is traveling at 170 knots. The ambient outside temperature is 42 degrees Fahrenheit.
But when you factor in the wind chill of hitting the air at 170 knots, he is stepping into a 15-degree Fahrenheit deep freeze.
That's like stepping out of a race car going top speed down the highway directly into a commercial meat locker.
And what is he wearing? He has no thermal gear, no jump boots, no goggles. He didn't even ask for a helmet.
He is wearing a thin business suit, a trench coat, and slip-on loafers. The sheer violent force of the wind hitting him the second he cleared the stairs would have ripped those loafers right off his feet.
But the most baffling detail, the absolute fatal flaw that proves he was not a professional, is his parachute selection.
Oh, this part is wild.
Remember, the FBI delivered 4 parachutes to the plane, 2 main canopy back chutes and 2 reserve chest chutes. One of those reserve chutes was what is known as a dummy rig.
Hold on, wait a second. You're telling me out of all the functioning parachutes they gave him, one was literally a theater prop. How does that even happen?
It was an accident of haste. Earl Causey, the skydiving instructor who provided the chutes, grabbed them from his school. One of the reserve chutes was used strictly for classroom demonstrations.
So it didn't even work.
Right. The canopy inside was literally sewn shut with heavy nylon thread. It was completely useless for an actual jump. And out of the 4 parachutes Cooper had to choose from, he grabbed the dummy rig and strapped it to his chest as his primary reserve.
Are you kidding me? He took the one parachute that was physically incapable of opening.
A true professional, an experienced military paratrooper, or a seasoned sports skydiver would never, ever make that mistake. They would inspect the rigging. They would check the packing cards hidden inside the flaps.
Cooper didn't do any of that. He strapped a useless prop to his chest.
Furthermore, for his main chute, he selected a military NB-8 canopy. Jumping at 170 knots with an NB-8 is incredibly violent.
How violent are we talking?
The rapid deceleration from that speed to near zero in less than 300 feet creates an opening shock that experts say would feel exactly like being in a severe car crash without a seatbelt.
Ouch.
It could easily snap the neck of an untrained jumper, or the force could completely shred the canopy material.
I know some of you listening right now are screaming at your dashboard, wondering how a guy smart enough to hack the hydraulics of a Boeing 727 is dumb enough to jump into a freezing storm with a sewn-shut parachute in slip-on shoes.
It makes no sense.
If you are watching on YouTube right now, let us know. Do you think this was staggering, blinding hubris? Or was he secretly suicidal? Do you even care if he survived the fall?
The jump itself is a physics nightmare, but the microscopic evidence he left behind in his seat changes the entire suspect profile.
Because when the plane finally lands in Reno, Nevada at 11:15 at night, with the aft stairs literally dragging and throwing sparks on the runway, the cabin is totally empty.
The bomb is gone. The money is gone. Cooper is gone.
And the FBI immediately launches one of the most massive, desperate manhunts in American history. They scour the dense wilderness of southwest Washington.
They use ground troops from Fort Lewis. They fly helicopters low over the tree canopy. They even utilize a CIA SR-71 Blackbird spy plane to take high-resolution photographs of the drop zone.
And they find absolutely nothing. No body, no shredded parachute canopy caught in a tree, no crater in the mud. The only physical evidence they have is what he left on the airplane.
He left 8 Raleigh cigarette butts in the armrest ashtray. He left a single strand of hair on the fabric headrest of seat 18E, and he left his JCPenney clip-on tie resting on the cushion.
And here's where we see catastrophic, unforgivable institutional failures. The FBI had the cigarette butts. They had his literal saliva.
But decades later, in the early 2000s, when DNA profiling became a viable forensic science, agents went to the vault to extract the DNA. They discovered the Las Vegas field office had lost the cigarette butts. They completely destroyed the chain of evidence.
The head hair sample, also lost, disappeared from the evidence locker without a trace.
It makes you want to pull your hair out. They had the guy's exact genetic code, the absolute golden ticket to solving the case, and they just threw it in the trash.
But the clip-on tie remained securely in the vault, and in 2009, a group of brilliant independent researchers known as the Citizen Sleuths petitioned the FBI and got permission to analyze that JCPenney tie using a scanning electron microscope.
And what they found blew the case wide open. Using sticky tape, they lifted over 100,000 microscopic particles embedded deep in the silk fibers of the tie.
And we aren't talking about everyday dust or pollen. We are talking about highly specific industrial elements.
They found pure, unalloyed titanium, along with rare earth elements like cerium, strontium sulfide, and bismuth.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, titanium, my golf clubs have titanium in them. My bicycle frame is titanium. Why does that matter?
Let's break down the metallurgy of 1971. In 1971, pure, unalloyed titanium was not used in consumer products.
It was an incredibly specialized, highly expensive, and highly volatile metal used almost exclusively in cutting-edge aerospace manufacturing.
Right. It was found in sanitized cleanroom environments. Specifically, the presence of these exact particles heavily links the wearer of that tie to a highly specialized chemical plant, or the Boeing Supersonic Transport Project, known as the SST, which was being developed in the Pacific Northwest at that exact time.
This changes everything. It points directly to a corporate insider, an engineer, a metallurgist, or a manager who wore a cheap clip-on tie onto a factory floor.
Which perfectly aligns with him knowing the exact classified mechanics of the Boeing 727's aft stairs.
It changes the psychological profile entirely. He is not a rogue mercenary. He is an industrial worker.
A man who likely faced layoffs, considering the massive economic downturn and job cuts at Boeing during that specific period, which perfectly explains his quote to Tina Mucklow, "I just have a grudge."
And yet, for decades, the FBI had the public looking for the completely wrong guy. Let's talk about the composite sketch. They released this drawing of a handsome, suave, Bing Crosby-looking guy with perfect hair and a sharp jawline.
But Bill Mitchell, the college student who sat directly across the aisle from Cooper for hours, told the FBI that the sketch was a joke.
Mitchell described a man who was weathered. He called his appearance geeky and noted he had bad hair, possibly a cheap toupee.
But the most crucial anatomical detail Mitchell provided was a distinct physical anomaly. He said Cooper had a prominent fold of loose skin under his chin. He specifically called it a turkey gobble.
A turkey gobble. And the FBI completely ignored. They airbrushed the guy to look like a Hollywood movie star.
They threw away the turkey gobble, they literally lost the DNA, and they had the world looking for a phantom that didn't even exist.
The titanium tie points to a corporate insider, but the only physical evidence ever found on the ground defies the laws of biology.
Fast forward 9 years. It is February 10th, 1980. A family is vacationing on the sandy shores of the Columbia River at a place called Tina Bar, a few miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington.
An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram is raking the sandy riverbank to build a campfire, and his rake hits something soft.
He digs into the sand and uncovers 3 bundles of $20 bills. The bills are heavily deteriorated, crumbling at the edges, waterlogged, and fragile.
But the serial numbers are still perfectly legible. The FBI is called in. They cross-reference the numbers with the microfilm master list of the 10,000 bills given to the hijacker.
It is a perfect match. It is roughly $5,800 of Dan Cooper's exact ransom money.
Finally, 9 years later, they have physical proof on the ground. You would think this solves the mystery of where he landed. You would think the case is closed.
But the physical condition of the money completely breaks the FBI's timeline. We have to lay out the forensic oddities here because they are staggering.
First, the money was found bundled with rubber bands. The rubber bands were still intact. They crumbled when handled by the investigators, but they were physically holding the stacks together in the sand.
Let's explain why that is a biological impossibility. Rubber bands exposed to the elements, ultraviolet sunlight, freezing water, microbes in the soil disintegrate rapidly.
They turn into brittle mush in a matter of months.
Yeah.
They absolutely, unequivocally do not survive 9 years buried in a wet, fluctuating riverbank. How on earth could the rubber band survive?
It couldn't have, not for 9 years. And then science provided another massive, undeniable clue. Researchers carefully analyzed the decaying paper money and found diatoms sandwiched deep between the individual bills.
I know what you're thinking. What is a diatom?
Diatoms are microscopic, single-celled algae. They have these intricate hard cell walls made of silica. When they die, those silica shells remain, acting like microscopic fossils.
Okay, so why do we care about these microfossils?
Well, the specific species of diatom they found wedged between Cooper's bills was Asterianella formosa.
Let's break down why Asterianella formosa is the smoking gun here.
Because Asterianella formosa has a highly specific seasonal blooming period. It only blooms in the spring when the water temperature and sunlight hit specific thresholds.
Wait, but the hijacking happened in late November. It was freezing cold. It was the dead of winter.
Exactly. The presence of the specific diatom proves the money was submerged in the river water during a spring season bloom, not in the winter when the jump occurred.
That is huge.
It gets better. Geologists analyzed the exact stratigraphy, the layering of the sand where the money was buried. They determined that the specific layer of sand the money rested in was deposited on Tennebar during a massive dredging operation conducted by the Army Corps of Engineers.
And when did that dredging operation happen?
That dredging operation happened in 1974.
Let that sink in. 3 years after the hijacking. So the exact layer of sand the money was buried in didn't even exist on that beach when Cooper jumped out of the plane.
The implication is massive and undeniable. The money didn't fall from the sky, land on the beach, and get slowly buried by the river over time. It was intentionally planted.
Someone survived that jump. They survived the 15-degree wind chill, they held onto the money for years, and then at some point after 1974, they walked onto that beach, dug a hole, and intentionally buried a portion of the ransom to throw the FBI off the scent.
Or maybe they buried it because the serial numbers were too hot to spend and they planned to come back for it later but never did.
Pause for a second and ask yourself, if you survived the most infamous heist in American history, would you risk returning to the scene of the crime years later just to plant the cash? Drop a comment on the YouTube video with your theory.
Was it a diversion or a stash he couldn't retrieve? It is so incredibly bold. To carry that heavy canvas bag of evidence around for years, knowing the FBI is hunting you, and then to stage a fake landing zone.
The buried money proves a cover-up, but the origin of his fake name exposes a bizarre foreign connection you will not believe.
The entire world knows this hijacker as D.B. Cooper, but that name is a complete fiction. It was a massive mistake made in the chaos of the immediate manhunt.
A wire reporter named James Long was listening to a police briefing. The local police mentioned they were checking out a local Portland man with a minor criminal record whose actual name was D.B. Cooper, just to rule him out as a suspect.
Right, and Long misheard the context, conflated the two men, and rushed the name D.B. Cooper to the press.
The hijacker actually signed his boarding pass, Dan Cooper. And for decades, the FBI just assumed it was a generic, made-up name, like John Doe. But it wasn't.
In 1971, there was a very popular comic book series in Europe titled Dan Cooper. The protagonist of the comic was a fictional Royal Canadian Air Force test pilot.
This character flew experimental aircraft, traveled to outer space, and most importantly, he frequently parachuted out of planes in desperate situations.
One of the issues published right around the time of the hijacking even featured a vivid cover illustration of the character Dan Cooper parachuting into a dark sky.
But here is the absolute kicker. That comic book was never translated into English. It was sold exclusively in Belgium, France, and the French-speaking provinces of Canada.
It is a massive red flag. It implies the suspect either served overseas in the military in Europe and picked up the comic, or he was French-Canadian.
He chose an obscure, foreign, French-language comic book hero as his alias, and the FBI completely missed the linguistic connection for almost 40 years.
Which brings us to the suspects. Over the decades, people have thrown hundreds of names at the wall. Let's briefly dismiss the noise.
You have Richard McCoy, who pulled off a copycat hijacking months later. But McCoy was way too young, he had the wrong eye color, and he was a devout Mormon who strictly didn't smoke or drink. Our hijacker pounded bourbon and chain-smoked Raleighs. McCoy is out.
Then you have Dwayne Weber. He makes a highly dramatic deathbed confession to his wife saying, "I am Dan Cooper." But years later, the FBI tests his DNA against the small fragments they did manage to save, and it is a definitive mismatch. He is ruled out entirely.
Then there is Barb Dayton, a trans woman pilot, who claims she did the jump, disguised as a man, landed near Woodburn, Oregon, and hid the money in a cistern. But she later completely recanted this story.
People confess to this crime constantly, seeking the notoriety. It's a weird psychological phenomenon. But none of them have the titanium manufacturing connection, none of them have the turkey gobble neck, and none of them have the francophone comic book knowledge.
And while the public is busy making T-shirts, writing folk songs, and elevating a violent extortionist to the status of an American folk hero, we are completely ignoring the real tragedy of this case, the erasure of the victims.
This is what makes me absolutely furious about true crime culture. We romanticize the guy in the sunglasses. We think it's a cool heist movie. But look at what he actually did.
He terrorized young, underpaid women for money. Florence Schaffner spent that flight in absolute paralyzing terror. She went on record saying she was terrified he was going to take her by the wrist and sexually assault her right there in the empty back rows of the plane.
She sat there imagining her parents watching the evening news, wondering if their daughter was going to be blown to pieces in the sky.
And we cannot forget Tina Mucklow. She was 22 years old. She sat inches away from a live bomb for hours.
She acted as a human shield, constantly managing his temper, keeping him calm so he wouldn't detonate the explosive. Her bravery saved the lives of every single person on that plane.
And how was she rewarded for her heroism? She was harassed for her entire adult life. Amateur sleuths, aggressive journalists, and obsessive conspiracy theorists dogged her relentlessly.
They didn't care about her trauma. They didn't care about her PTSD. They only wanted to know what Cooper smelled like, what his exact tone of voice sounded like.
The harassment was so severe, so invasive, that she eventually disappeared from public life entirely and joined a convent in the 1980s. She was forced into hiding to find peace, while the man who traumatized her became a celebrated American legend.
He is not a legend. He is a desperate extortionist who permanently broke the lives of the women who survived him.
Somewhere out there, perhaps sitting in a dusty attic or buried deep under decades of Pacific Northwest mud, is the missing briefcase with the bomb, or the lost Raleigh cigarette butts that hold the exact, complete DNA profile of the man who vanished into the storm.
The ghost is still out there, hiding behind a comic book name and an FBI sketch that looks absolutely nothing like him.
All right, if we made your drive, your workout, or your downtime even a little bit better today, do us a massive favor. Whether you are watching on YouTube, streaming on Spotify, listening on Apple Podcasts, or literally anywhere else, hit that follow or subscribe button right now. We drop episodes like this frequently, bringing you the most fascinating cases in the most interesting way possible. Lock in, because you do not want to miss the crazy mysteries we have queued up for next time. See you then.